Hi everyone, my name is Rae Sheridan. I'm an artist and an activist, and I have chosen a crash course in feminist art and activism for you today, specifically with the ideas of unlikable women. It's been said that likability means relatability, and that relatability is what a woman needs to be accepted in society. When in reality, likability means palatability, and specifically how palatable women are to a patriarchal world in many cases, both fictional and otherwise. You have to suppress yourself and be silent in order to be likable. Ultimately, that silence means that somebody else gets to tell your story, somebody else gets to write your history. And I think it's become very commonplace now for women to say enough. In 1971, art historian Linda Nochlin wrote an essay titled "Why There Are No Great Women Artists." Nochlin, throughout her essay, questions the conditions for producing art and what makes great art. And one of the most controversial passages of her essay is that she says the quiet part out loud, and she really says that men believe that there is an innate genius behind them just being men, and therefore gives them the agency to be able to paint at a higher caliber, a higher mind than that of a woman. I think it's no surprise that the word feminist is a controversial title, and it's no longer seen as a badge of honor, but rather a scarlet letter somehow marking you, not as a liberated woman, but as a radical one. In the mid-'80s, an anonymous female group known as the Guerrilla Girls surfaced with the original poster. This is the one from 2012. They do different iterations of this poster every so often. The one from 1989 has less than 5% of the artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% are nudes. The one from 2005 is less than 3% with 83% of nudes. And the one from 2012 is 4% with 76% of nudes. And those numbers are still not that drastically different for almost 35 years of activism within the arts community. I think it's been very clear and apparent that the Guerrilla Girls have always been deemed unlikable women since their iteration, because they are combative in their efforts to challenge these status quos and binaries which have oppressed women, especially within the arts community, because as we have already discussed, that limits us and our ability to tell our version of our history. Not only that, it's that we have so many male artists such as Chuck Close here, who is a known predator, and museums still acquire his works for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars at auction, and still refuse to show women. So it doesn't matter if you're a rapist, it doesn't matter if you're a sexual predator, you're still better than a woman is the message that these institutions are continually telling women artists. It doesn't matter if Matisse or Picasso were assholes. They're still, with their innate genius that Linda Nochlin talked about, still better than a woman. And I love the Guerrilla Girls, and I can wax poetic about them all day long. And one of the things I really love about them is that they are relentless in their pursuit. They wear the gorilla mask as a play on words to guerrilla warfare, to really dial in and combat the 1% and the people who can afford these gigantic acquisitions that have more money than you and I could possibly ever hope for. And we're saying we want our piece of it. We are creatives, we are legitimate, we exist in our humanness, and we are here, and we are worthy of your gaze. And speaking of gays, Barbara Kruger is another artist. She mostly works in collage and graphic design, and she does large-scale installations of her work. This piece is titled "Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face," where she actively combats who's looking at whom here. I think the objectification of the gaze really, it was explained well recently in the Barbie movie with Ken, where how he does not exist if Barbie doesn't look at him. He doesn't have a good day if Barbie doesn't have a good day with him. And I think that is really telling because it flipped the script on the head to how we really could understand the gaze as it pertains to women. Women have only ever been noticed if it's a male looking at them, and this is translated into art and media as well. So Barbara Kruger here is explicitly saying, I feel your gaze hits the side of my face, but it does not put limitations on me as a person. Like, I am whole outside of this gaze. And I think it's because of this gaze, how we identify coded feminism and femininity in art has become so ingrained in our collective psyche under the problem of naming, which protects and identifies based on gender conformity within the confines of society. So that means like it becomes exclusive rather than inclusive for the sake of preserving the patriarchal mainstream. So you have to, in order to be seen as worthy, basically play the game. Like, the more hyper feminine you are in the patriarchal system, in any system, take it outside of the context of art and museums of what we're talking here, and it still is applicable. You have to pay to play and play by their rules. Amelia Jones, who was a feminist thinker, wrote in an essay on post-feminism, the most important question is whether feminism has been co-opted by being harnessed to other discourses which neutralize its radical potential, and this determination of an end to feminism, most often articulated by male critics who congratulate themselves for their attention to the art by women, is revealing itself to be part of a larger decursive project to appropriate feminism into the larger masculine line of projects of universal humanism or critical postmodernism. Jones notes here that while someone may identify as feminine, identity does not dictate alignment, as we have seen throughout history. And I think that's why a lot of women who are artists have not embraced the term woman artist because of this. Mary Garrard, who is a feminist thinker and art historian, she says that woman has always been a subordinated term with a binary opposition, which I think a lot of artists agree with. So in this perspective, essentialism, by asserting an eternal gender difference, reinforces this binary resistance of man versus woman, and ultimately perpetuating this masculinist Western metaphysics by failing to acknowledge that the play of difference in language, as well as the considerable differences that play across endlessly diverse bodies and personalities that are inhabiting those bodies. One contemporary artist who comes to mind who challenges this is photographer Catherine Opie, and she's dedicated her craft to documenting queer, gender nonconforming persons within queer subcultures under performative gender norms that dictate our everyday lives. And she really combats that gaze that we were talking about. Suzanne Lacey explains that art is a stage for which we experiment with performative gender roles, and I think that Catherine Opie really does express concern for her queer identity and represents undeniable femininity within her art in the work. In her 2004 piece pictured here, it's called Self-Portrait/Nursing, Opie questions what traditional motherhood should look like, pushing the boundaries of femininity and queerness with one photo. Contrasting historical paintings of motherhood, Opie openly defies the canon perpetuated by white male historians and subverts the patriarchal notion of femininity and motherhood without excluding her queerness. Her photo represents self-awareness and oneness with self, and an unabashed display of self-acceptance. And going back to the unlikable women, women being a very loose term during this presentation, Catherine Opie really has always been controversial within the art world because she is so open about her blurred lines and her queerness within her work. There was an upswing in progression a while ago, but unfortunately in the past 2 years we've actually taken a downswing back to that of like the mid 80s with how women are being represented in museums and art galleries and who's buying whom. I think we're still battling systemic issues that actively oppress BIPOC and marginalized creatives. There's still protests and essentialists who are refusing to let go of this traditional canon that is undoubtedly in its death throes. And the death rattle of white male patriarchy, it cometh. And I think it would be a celebrated victory for all marginalized folks when, that final breath is drawn. Women are still earning less in all professions, and unfortunately there's still a material hierarchy regarding art, with oil and canvas being the top choice. We as women need to learn to use our voice and share our experiences and actively make good trouble that keeps the powers that be in line and on their toes. And I think artists like the Guerrilla Girls that we talked about previously are actively doing that, and I think that there's someone to watch if this topic interests you. Even if it's an infantile peak of interest into what could be a burgeoning passion of yours, I would keep an eye on the Guerrilla Girls. And going back to the Unlikable women and why there have been no great women artists, and it's because we still, even 40 years later, after Knocklin wrote on the topic, we don't allow ourselves the agency to assume that we, as women, are capable of greatness without validation from the comparison of a man. Even if that comparison is subconscious. I don't think that it's our fault, but I think it's something that we have to do the shadow work for confronting within ourselves and fighting the conditioning that we've been just immersed in for so long. And I think as much as we dissolve the constructs of a gender binary, we will never be fully inclusive until we as women and marginalized folks are not seen as the sum of our parts that identifies us to the world as feminine. We are all valid in our womanness, and our individuality is expressed outwardly in our creativity. I don't think it should be up to men to tell our story, because if history has taught us anything, is that they attempt to oppress and eradicate us from their version of history and say that we went along with it. It is what happens and has been happening for centuries. Conclusively, there is still no great women artists, not for lack of numbers or talented women artists that are provocative and have a message, but that we don't recognize them until we stop comparing ourselves to what we have achieved under the thumbs of men for the sake of their comfort, because it certainly isn't for ours.